There is something your body has been quietly telling you for years, something your doctor checks for in tests, but never quite explains in the room where you sit across from each other. You have felt it yourself, perhaps more on some mornings than others. A kind of knowing. This video is not for everyone, but if you are still here, still reading, still holding on, then it was made for you. Emotional setup. There are evenings perhaps when the house gets very quiet. Not an unpleasant quiet, but the kind that sits beside you, that you have learned to live with. You move through your days with a routine that feels familiar, perhaps even comforting. And somewhere inside that routine, there is a question you have not spoken aloud to anyone. Am I doing enough? Will my body hold? You know this feeling. That quiet inventory you take of yourself, the joints that ache a little more in winter, the sleep that does not come as easily, the energy that returns more slowly than it once did. Nobody around you sees it, but you do. You have been watching yourself more carefully than you have ever admitted, and you deserve to know what that watching has actually been telling you. Credibility bridge. Doctors who study longevity, not just illness but the art of living long and living well, have found again and again that the people who reach 85, 90 and beyond are rarely the ones who did extraordinary things. They are the ones who did small things with extraordinary consistency. Elders who have walked this path before us left behind a pattern, and that is why what you are about to hear matters more than you realize. We will get to point 5 in a moment, and I want you to pay very close attention when we do, because it is the one that most people dismiss without a second thought, and it is the one that changes everything. Now we discuss 6 points. Point 1. The body does not forget what the mind ignores, and the first habit is about honoring that truth every single morning. Before food, before screens, before any obligation of the day arrives. Moving your body in the early morning hour does something that no supplement can replicate. It signals to every system inside you, I am still here. I choose this day. For those past 65, this matters deeply. The body's rhythms have shifted. What was effortless at 40 requires intention now. But intention, given consistently, becomes something powerful. There was a man named Harold, 71 years old, who had spent most of his adult life sitting at a desk. After his wife passed, his doctor told him his blood pressure was dangerously high. He did not join a gym. He simply began walking to the end of his street every morning before breakfast, 15 minutes, in silence. 8 months later, his doctor looked at his chart and said quietly, "Whatever you changed, keep doing it." The cost of not moving in these years is not just physical. It is the slow erosion of the belief that your body is still yours to direct. And once that belief fades, something larger fades with it. The body moves, and so does the spirit. That is not poetry. That is physiology. But here is something I want you to sit with for a moment before we continue. It is not the size of the habit that matters. It is the decision, made again, every morning, to show up for yourself when no one is watching. Point 2. What you eat after dark may be doing more damage than what you eat during the day. And most seniors have never been told this directly. The body after 65 processes food on a different clock. Digestion slows. Insulin sensitivity shifts. The organs that filter and repair, the liver, the kidneys, do their deepest work in the hours after midnight, but only when they are not still managing a late dinner. Eating your last meal earlier in the evening is not a deprivation. It is a gift you give your body while you sleep. There was a woman named Sylvia, 74, who had been waking at 3 in the morning for years, restless, her mind turning, her stomach never quite settled. Her doctor offered medication. Instead, a neighbor mentioned, almost in passing, that she had moved her dinner to 6 o'clock. Sylvia tried it. Within 3 weeks she was sleeping through to morning for the first time in years. The body will tell you what it needs if you are quiet enough to listen, and sometimes what it needs is simply more time to do its work in peace. A smaller window of eating is not a smaller life, it is often a longer one. And we haven't even reached the one that longevity researchers say is the most consistently overlooked and the most quietly powerful. That comes next. Point 3. Sleep, real, uninterrupted, honored sleep, is not a luxury after 65. It is the single most powerful act of self-preservation available to you. There is a generation that was taught to pride itself on needing little sleep. To rest was to be lazy. To sleep 8 hours was self-indulgent. That belief has done more quiet damage than most people will ever know. During deep sleep, the brain clears waste. The heart rests, muscles repair, hormones reset. For those past 65, this process is slower, which means it needs more time, not less. There was a retired teacher named Dorothy, 68, who had worn her 5-hour nights like a badge for decades. Her memory began to slip. She assumed it was age. Her doctor eventually told her something she had never considered. Her brain had not had enough time for years to do its nightly work. She began protecting 8 hours the way she once protected her students' learning time, as non-negotiable. The years lost to poor sleep cannot be reclaimed, but the years ahead can still be protected. Sleep is not the end of your day. It is the foundation of the next one. Point 4. Nobody is going to say this to your face, so I will. The news you watch every night before bed is quietly stealing years from your life. The mind does not separate what is real from what is urgent. When you absorb fear and conflict and tragedy in the hours before sleep, your body responds with stress hormones that linger for hours, long after the screen goes dark. Blood pressure rises, sleep fragments, inflammation, which doctors now link to nearly every major illness of aging, quietly increases. This is not speculation. It is what the body does with threat. There was a man named Robert, 70 years old, whose evening ritual had been the news for 30 years. His blood pressure required 2 medications. His cardiologist suggested, gently, that he consider changing the last hour of his night. Robert did not believe it would matter. He was wrong. 11 points lower in 6 weeks. His doctor asked what he had changed. What you give your attention to in those last quiet hours is what your body carries into the night. Choose it as carefully as you choose anything else. The world will still be there in the morning. Your heart deserves the evening. If you have stayed with me this far, what comes next was written for you specifically. Point 5. The muscle you build after 65 is not vanity. It is the architecture of your remaining years. After 65, the body loses muscle mass at a rate that most doctors mention briefly and most patients dismiss entirely. But muscle is not simply about strength. It is the metabolic engine of the body. It protects the bones. It governs how glucose is used. It determines in profound ways how long you are able to live independently, to carry your own groceries, to rise from your own chair, to walk without fear of falling. There was a woman named Agnes, 72, who had never exercised a day in her adult life. Her daughter bought her 2 small dumbbells after a fall that frightened the whole family. Agnes began, slowly seated in her kitchen chair. She felt foolish at first. A year later, her bone density scan showed results that surprised her doctor. She had not just maintained, she had improved. The body, even at 75, responds to effort. It does not forget how to grow. It only needs to be asked. You are not too old to build something. You are exactly old enough to know why it matters. The last point, and the words I want to leave you with, are the reason I made this video. Stay with me. Point 6. The one habit that longevity researchers find again and again in people who live the longest is the one most often dismissed as too simple, and it is simply this: one real connection. Every single day. Not a group, not a notification. One person whose voice you hear, whose name you say aloud, who knows something true about your life. The research on loneliness in older adults is now so clear that some doctors have begun calling it a clinical risk factor, as serious as smoking, as measurable as blood pressure. The body of a lonely person ages differently. The immune system weakens. Inflammation rises. The will to continue small daily habits quietly erodes. There was a man named George, 76, who had lived alone for 8 years after his wife died. He was not unhappy, but he was quiet. A neighbor began calling him every Tuesday morning, just to talk, just to share the small things of the week. George's daughter noticed 6 months later that something in her father had returned. He was sleeping better. He had started walking again. He seemed, she said, present in a way he had not been in years. One voice, one connection, one person who sees you. The body heals differently when it knows it is not alone. If you have stayed with me this far, what comes next was written for you specifically. Deep reflection segment. There is a particular quality to the light in the late afternoon. That hour when the day has already given most of what it intends to give, and the evening has not yet arrived. If you have lived long enough, you know that hour well. You may have stood in it, in a kitchen or a garden or a room that once held more people than it does now, and felt the weight of time in a way that is very hard to name. The years go. They go whether you are watching or not, whether you are ready or not. The photographs on your walls, the faces in them younger than you remember, the moments in them more distant than they feel, do not lie about where the time has gone. You have lived something real, something that most people who are still young cannot yet understand. And yet, here you are, still in that light, still watching it move across the room, still choosing even now to do the next small thing. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything. Empowerment shift. There is a kind of wisdom that only comes from having lived long enough to lose things, and to continue anyway. You know something that cannot be taught in a classroom or read in a book. You know what it feels like to carry grief and still get up in the morning, to feel the body change and choose to care for it nonetheless, to watch the world move faster and faster and decide, quietly, to move at your own pace. The 6 habits in this video are not complicated. They do not require money or equipment or a younger body. They require only what you already possess, the awareness that time is not infinite, and the decision to use what remains of it with intention. Awareness is not a small thing. Most people live their entire lives without it. The fact that you are here, listening, considering, that is already the first act of change. What you do tomorrow morning, before breakfast, before the world asks anything of you, is entirely yours to decide. And that decision, repeated quietly, day after day, is what the people who live longest have always known. Not a secret, not a miracle. Just the daily, unhurried, deeply human choice to still be here. The last point, and the words I want to leave you with, are the reason I made this video. Stay with me. Final words. You came to this video carrying something, perhaps a question about your body, or your time, or whether the habits of your days are enough. And what I want to leave you with is this: the fact that you are asking the question at all means something. It means you have not stopped caring for yourself. It means somewhere beneath the quiet routine of your days, there is still a voice that wants more time, more mornings, more evenings, more of that late afternoon light. The 6 habits we spoke of today are not a cure. They are not a promise. They are simply what the people who lived longest had in common: a respect for the body, a gentleness toward themselves, and the daily unglamorous decision to show up for one more day. You deserve that. Not because of what you have accomplished, but because you are still here, still listening, still choosing. Take care of yourself, because time never waits. Call to action. If something in this video touched you, if it reminded you of something you have been quietly carrying, then share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you would like to continue this conversation, there is another video waiting for you that speaks to the warning signs your body sends after 65 that most people mistake for normal aging. I will see you there.